At Odds and Ends by Corndog_Patrol and For the Wolfie on AO3. Chapter 7 Carrion Birds. Shouta hadn't thought this through. He'd seen a vamp, overtaken by blood lust, and Nemuri, a potential victim, and his body had moved between the two. Hizashi had clearly been struggling against his natural instincts with everything he had. But Shouta knew how suddenly a vamp could lose what little control they had, so he offered himself instead. Shouta knew how long it took a beast to drain a human body. If Hisashi neared taking too much, he would stop him. And surely Shouta was a tastier option than the maid. He was too brainwashed to even run away. So without thinking, he offered himself. Hisashi refused like an idiot, so Shouta tried to make resistance impossible by pressing against him and baring his neck. However, instead of biting him, Hisashi hugged him. The leech clung to Shouta like a lifeline, trembling all the while, with his face against his willing neck. Yet he didn't bite him. Shouta refused to release him, figuring it would only be a matter of time before he caved. But gradually the shaking stopped, and the vampire's breathing evened out. However, he didn't release him until Hisashi quickly grumbled, "No, I won't." Something in the tone surprised Shouta, perhaps with how lucid it was, and he hesitantly pulled away. Hisashi's eyes flashed emerald green, although his face was far paler than usual. His pupils ducked to the left, and Shouta followed to find the ice block with the red dot symbol emphasized on the side. With the immediately danger miraculously gone, Shouta stepped away from the vampire. Hisashi closed his eyes tightly and covered his nose. Shota's body must have temporarily overpowered the scent of his blood, but this control wouldn't last much longer. Shouta didn't hesitate now to quickly deceive into the storage box and rumbled around the ice until he found a red bag labeled B. There were frozen chunks floating inside, but as he pulled it out, Hisashi snatched it from him and snuck his fangs into it immediately. He trembled in disgust at the icy temperature, but drained it quickly and efficiently. Shouta watched, far more interested than he really wanted to, as the red was morphed into the sharp fangs, and Hisashi's cheek grew rosier. As soon as the bag was empty, Hisashi tossed it to the side and slumped, as if a great weight had been placed on his shoulders. "Fuck," he murmured unhappily, as he rubbed his face. "So gross." "I gave you the permission to drink from me." Shouta didn't know why he was annoyed that the vamp hadn't. "Are you a moron?" "Shouta," said Hisashi, and he looked at him seriously. "Your blood's an aphrodisiac. Your blood is an aphrodisiac." The words were blunt. Shouta felt as if he'd been wounded by them. "If I drank it, I would have had a different issue to deal with, without any outlet." "I mean, I could think of a few potential outlets," said Nemuri, surprising them both. Despite everything, she hadn't fled the room, as she was busily cleaning up the spilled blood with a mop. Her face was red, and by the look of it, she couldn't stop grinning. "My blood's not an aphrodisiac," Shouta insisted, his stomach turning. "There's no way." "You might not be aware, but some bloodlines are old enough to have developed—"
"I am aware,"
he growled, catching them both by surprise with his anger.
"and there's no way my blood would do that."
It couldn't be true. It would mean his own blood had utterly betrayed him. Shouta was a vampire slayer. There was no way his blood had evolved to make vampires get off. Hisashi and Nemuri shared a look before the maid pulled down her mop and went to his side. "You're not alone, Shouta," she told him gently. Nemuri looked uncomfortable, as if she had changed her mind on something. Her fingers toyed with the hem of her sleeve, but she didn't pull them up. Some people get a kick out of things that are supposed to hurt them. You're safe here, Hisashi said, wiping away a bit of blood with his sleeve. No one else needs to know about it, so no one will come after you. I just don't think I could drink your blood. The leech looked sheepish. I know how to deal with bloodlust. I'm a little out of practice with regular lust. Nomuri resumed cleaning up. Well, I know a way you could get plenty of practice, she murmured with a grin, but the comment went ignored. I can't go back there, Shouta said firmly, catching them both by surprise. If it means I get to stay here, I'll do whatever you want. Those very words went against everything he stood for. To promise himself to a leech? But Shouta was desperate. Okay, Hisashi said, folding his arms, and Shouta waited for more direction. I'm going away for 2 days for a performance across town. You can stay if you agree to relax. He was caught off guard by the simplicity of it, and the blonde smiled gently. I won't return you unless you want me to. I know you hate vampires. It's hard not to notice, but I hope we can prove to you that some of us are okay, at least. No one in this mayor wishes you any harm. Shouta had no clue what devilish trick the monster was planning. They were probably trying to brainwash him, too. Hisashi must have realized Shota's silence, because he turned away and repeated. As I said before, I've got a performance across town, and they offered accommodation. I'll be back the day after tomorrow, although I'll need Kan and Obro. You and Nomuri and Tensei will be looking after the house. I hope they'll be okay. Where's the performance? Shouta asked, trying to make his voice as disinterested as possible. Hisashi turned back, his eyes raised, nerved nevertheless. As I said, it's across town. I meant, whose party are you playing? Himeji Maijima, Hisashi answered, a sheepish smile. Although I doubt that means anything to you. It didn't. Shouta immediately lost interest. Hisashi paused, but the Slayer said nothing more. Right. Don't worry. Nomuri and Tensei will keep you company. Shouta grunted. Nomuri snorted. And although Hisashi's body was turned towards the door, something seemed to keep him tethered to the room. Thank you, Shouta. For a moment, he felt as if he'd been punched by the words. Huh? You were worried about Nomuri, Hisashi said, his voice quieter. He was perspective for a leech. You thought I drank from her in my frenzy, so you put yourself between us. You have a good heart. The vamp just continued to weird him out. However, her blood is A-type. If I were to drink from it, I would turn feral. He looked away from the Slayer, although Shouta had spied a haunted look in his emerald eyes. I would rather die. With those words, Hisashi left. Shouta hated him. Most leech were easy to understand, but this, Hizashi Yamada, was trying to play stupid mind games with them. That must have been it, because there's no way a vampire really cared about humans. Right? Later that night, when Hisashi left, Shouta didn't leave his room. The party was busy, just as Hisashi had expected. Oboro had stayed up in the bedroom they had been given for accommodation. Bakan was just never far from the bachelor side. As soon as they stepped into the crowded ballroom, all eyes were on them. He heard murmurs of their names, but with the larger vampire, none had the guts to approach him, except Hisashi, called out Higuri, as he hurried over to them, grinning. I'm glad you can make it. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Hisashi lied. When he agreed to do it months ago, he hadn't expected to have an angry donor. But, as determined as he was to disprove Shota's hate, he couldn't break a promise. Despite most of the day passing simply from the travel, Hisashi's fangs continued to ache from the blag of icy blood he had downed earlier. Well, said Higuri, the stage is this way. The man hopefully led them to the raised platform where a music stand was already set up for him. There were vases of tall flowers around it, and the wall was decorated by thick, velvet curtains. Feel free to start whenever you're ready. The friend nodded at him, and Hisashi bowed his head as he climbed onto the short stage and started unpacking his violin. Kan leaned against the wall, practically hidden behind one of the vases so he could keep a close vigil. Hisashi placed the music book on a stand and turned to the first song. He held up the violin, positioned his toes, and put the bow to the string. In that brief moment, he was alone in a vast room. The sound of clattering and the sensation of strange eyes gawing at him vanished, leaving Hisashi in a void of stillness. The flowers had a sweet scent that reminded him of his gazebo at home, and for a moment he imagined Shouta sitting in front of him, enraptured as if the vampire was secretly a siren. One small inhale, and then Hisashi started to play. Perhaps it really was a siren song, judging by the way letters of suitors continuously flowed through his mail. Whether it was or wasn't, he was sweating by the end of the first piece, only to follow it with another song, and then another. The night marched on, but time itself seemed lost in his notes. The crowd waltzed to every string, but the sound of their delight's laughter was so distant as if a thick curtain had separated Hisashi from their ranks. Inevitably, after 2 hours of playing, he needed a break. However, when the music ended, there were some calls of disappointment. The sound was close now, as if he had been returned to the world. Sorry, listeners. Got a thirst to quench. It did little to ease them, but Hisashi could keep playing until he had some water. He stepped off the stage, but Khan was at his side a moment later. I'll get it, he said. You don't need to. I can get it myself just fine. Khan shook his head. Rest here. I'll be right back. Before another argument was made, the guard disappeared, leaving Hisashi at the mercy of the closest crowd. He sat at the stage at first, calm. They blabbed on about his amazing skills, and Hisashi acted more interested in them than he felt. If his heart wasn't into his act tonight, they didn't notice. He did his best to be gracious, though, smiling and thanking them for the compliments, although part of him wanted to simply dismiss them. Rumor is you brought a blood bag, Mr. Yamada. The voice caught him off guard. Hisashi looked up to see the man looming over him, although at first he didn't think they were blurred. A botch of rich, violet feathers decorated broad shoulders, and a beak-shaped mask covered their lower jaw. However, once the surprise was gone, Hisashi recognized the vampire. Kai Shishake, although lately he preferred being called Overhaul. Yeah, Hisashi confirmed. He considered polite standing, knowing how much power this fellow vampire possessed, but his lower back ached from standing so long. It's different, isn't it? To simply drink the old stuff. A shame blood doesn't age like wine. It was difficult to gauge whether it was a joke or not, so Hisashi nodded. It was safer for everyone if he kept on Kai's good side. The vampire had always given him the creeps, and there were lots of rumors that suggested he was part of some shady businesses, like trafficking donors illegally from rare bloodlines. However, he had some serious allies, and even the government couldn't lay a finger on him. Part of him didn't want to tell Overhaul anything about Shouta, so he kept his answers as vague as possible. Yeah, it's certainly different. It isn't anything like I imagined. He tried his best not to remember the one time he tasted Shota's blood. You should bring them to a party, Kai said as he glanced around, as if he'd expected to see the human there too. He didn't need to specify which party, though. In 2 weeks, Overhaul was hosting a large gathering at his mansion, and every high society vampire had been invited. However, there was no way Hisashi would risk taking Shouta along, especially considering the rumors surrounding the vampire. They're not really good with crowds. A shame. Overhaul nodded and glanced up at the sight of Kai returning. Hopefully your blood bag changes his mind. I look forward to having you attend at the very least. Judging by the look in his eyes, Overhaul didn't want to be around Khan at all. A pleasant speaking with you, Mr. Yamada. We'll talk more. Before Hizashi could say anything else, Overhaul left, and just as Khan reached his side. You okay? The guard asked, offering a glass of water to Hizashi. He slipped it, thankfully, and wiped his mouth. He just wanted to know if I would bring Shouta to his ball. That guy's bad news. Khan grumbled. More than your donor. Like I don't know that? At least it's safer to be on his good side than his bad side. Hizashi sighed and downed the rest of his water, although his legs were still sore. He had no real choice but to continue playing. Shouta isn't going anywhere near him, and you can quote me on that. As Hizashi got back onto the stage, he positioned his violin. A dark realization troubled him. Hopefully your blood bag changes his mind. How had Overhaul known Shouta was a man? As he started playing his next piece, the Devil's Trill, Sanya, Hisashi's eyes scanned the room. There, on the opposite side of the gathering, was Overhaul, watching him like a hawk. 12 days remaining. The manor felt hollow with half its motley crew gone, as if several organs had been removed. Shouta tried staying in his room, but the need to move around and explore the empty house was too powerful to ignore. He stood on the balcony of his room, overlooking the gardens, but his eyes were continuously drawn to the gazebo beside the lake. The hanging wisteria flowers were just as beautiful in the daylight than in the night. As he looked down on them, he couldn't help but remember the mesmerizing sight of Hisashi playing, with the long sweeps of the bow against the string and the notes that had trilled. If he closed his eyes, he could almost hear it. Shouta shook his head and pulled himself away, deciding to find a book in the library and a quiet, sunny place to read. As he left the room, he walked down the hall. However, he was distracted by the sight of another staircase. It wasn't particularly surprising to see, since he'd passed it numerous times now, but he couldn't help but recall that the tour had neglected the upper floor. No one had actually told him it was forbidden, but there was no point in seeing it, as there were supposedly nothing to see. By the side of it, there were two staircases that led to the top floor, but only one had a platform for Tensei to use, while all the other staircases in the manor had one attached. It must have been used infrequently, as it was folded up against the side of the stairs, although any dust had been delectably cleaned from it. Shouta hadn't technically been forbidden from going there, but hadn't necessarily meant he was allowed. Hisashi, Khan, and Oboro wouldn't be back until tomorrow, so if he was going to do it, this would be the perfect opportunity. Besides, if he was found, then Tensei and Nomuri didn't have the power to return him without their lord around, and he would be able to explain his reasoning to them without the chances of a hasty decision. Shouta took the first step up and paused, as if waiting for the sounds of wheels or footsteps. There was nothing. Emboldened, he hurried up the stairs and entered the third floor. It was dark, with all the windows covered by thick, musty curtains, and the sorlets were unlit. There was a matchbox and a kerosene lamp on the side table, and he struggled to light it at first. Thankfully, it didn't seem too difficult to figure out, and soon he had the light going. Shouta inhaled, as if to prepare himself from what was on to come, and begin to explore. The floor seemed similar to the others, with a squat, horseshoe-shaped corridor, although the room hugged by this shape only had one entrance. It must have been a large room beyond, but where he had tried the handles for the twin doors, he was surprised to find they were locked. He tested them a few more times, but they didn't budge. None of the other doors had been locked throughout the mansion, not even the bedrooms. So why was this one any different? He pressed his ear to the door and listened for sound. Nothing. He kneeled on the floor and peered under the door, but only saw darkness beyond. However, a layer of dust beneath revealed that no one had been in the room for a while, even to clean. A lock with a good sign that a place was forbidden. If he got in, he wouldn't be able to feign innocent curiosity. Shouta stood and decided to explore the other rooms instead. There were too many, and only two of them stood out. The first was a bedroom that screamed exquisite. The bed was the largest he'd ever seen, and would have taken up his entire kitchen if his apartment still been standing. Everything was decorated with Ukri's skill, and the most exquisite his eyes had ever seen, while the smallest structure lined the shelves. The expensiveness made him uncomfortable. Although the room had been cleaned regularly, it felt disused. No, it wasn't just that. There was an oppressive atmosphere here. It must have belonged to Hisashi's parents. Shouta didn't stay in there long. The second room that stood out was the second library. It was far smaller than the other one downstairs, and even then, most of the shelves were empty. However, the sight of a writing desk informed him that this room was really a study. He had a glimpse of Hisashi's study, but despite similarities, this one was far different. Without a mess of papers across it, Shouta glanced over to the books first of all, every single one of them about blood. He pulled out from the shelves and flipped through it, but found a layer of dust on the papers. Although the place was cleaned, it wasn't that thorough. Just as with the locked room, there was some relief with how disused this place was. The book in hand was Arced, a first edition that described the properties of a random family's bloodline. He decided to pick up another one that was on the competition of human blood, while others were about the competition of hybrid blood. Shouta then came about another book, another bloodline. Shota's breath caught in his throat. Grief threatened to surface, but he forced it back down. He closed the book and pressed it to his forehead, trying to absorb any trace of strength it could give. What if his plan failed? What if he ran out of time? What if. What if he was wrong? What if he was crazy? For just a moment, he was drawn back to that day, 1 month ago. He'd arrived home from a mission, his arms full of grocery bags. However, as he neared his home, a sight of thick, bellowed smoke and ash had set him running instead. Shouta had hoped his calculations were wrong, but when he turned onto the street and seen the flames, his fears had been realized. The entire apartment building had been aflamed. The smoke had clouded the air and stung his eyes, making each breath labored and forced. He dropped the bags, spilling the fresh, celebrated produce across the cobblestone. However, as he neared his place, firemen had blocked his way. He dodged past them easily, and had entered the burning building, bellowing from his home. The door had already been splintered open, and he ducked close to the ground to avoid smoke and hailing. Furniture had been knocked over, and half the place had already been ablaze. The roar of flames and Shota's yells had been the only sound. It hadn't been a large area to search, and as he crawled along the floor, something hot had met his hands. A handmade doll that generously resembled a cat. Some of its stuffing had caught fire in the heat, but he hadn't hesitated to grab it quickly and extinguish its flames. The ceiling above had suddenly dropped several feet. Spiderwebs crackled, run along it. It had grown at the weight it was barely supporting. Shouta had been forced from his home moments before the ceiling had caved in, turning the small apartment into an inferno. He'd coughed mouthful of dangerous smoke, and with nowhere else to go, he escaped outside. The firemen had instantly tackled him. After a violent struggle, Shouta had released his arms that had been on fire. In the mess of his own emotions, he hadn't felt the pain of his skin that had been permanently seared. He had been forced reprimanded for rushing inside the burning building. He assured them that all residents had been rescued already. The smoke in Shota's lungs had made it impossible to speak. He refused to let go of the charged stuffed toy, as he had been brought to the group of survivors, but 1 month ago, for the second time in his life, Shouta had lost everything. His untempered grief reared its ugly head again. Shouta shoved it deep down, where he didn't have to face it. If he did, then he might have truly gone mad. God, I'm crying. Oh, we'll talk about that ending in a little bit. Can we talk about Shouta being annoyed? Shouta, not Shoto. Hold up. Shouta being annoyed that Hizashi didn't drink his blood. Why is that, Shouta? Like, what? You have something to share with the class? Also, the whole Shota's blood revealed. He's like, what? No way my blood would betray me like that. I'm sorry to break it to you. Your blood has betrayed you. I also want to talk about the whole him thinking like there's no way a vampire would actually care about a human. Right? Bigoted. But that right at the end, he's changing. He's changing for the better. We love a character development here in this household, right? We love character development. So we could already see some of his Shouta like learning to like actually trust Hizashi and stuff. So woo, let's celebrate on that part, He's finally learning to trust a little bit. Obviously, bit by bit. He's not gonna like out of nowhere just immediately trust, like that's not how it'd be working, Overhaul. Oh, we just met Overhaul. I mean, I thought that was gonna be obvious because the thumbnail, but Overhaul. Oh my god, that's a thing. That's something that's happening. What are you guys' opinions on that? On that end, you guys have any opinions on that? I know I do. I have lots of opinions on that. I think he should go in hell. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room and why I started crying as I was recording the ending. I don't know when, you could probably pick up when my breath hitched, because I felt it hitch. I don't know if the mic actually picked it up or not, but I started to tear up and stuff. Because that is a small clippet of Shota's past, or part of Shota's past, half of Shota's past. And oh my god, knowing the full story is heart-wrenching. Actually, I'm starting to cry again. It's heart-wrenching knowing what actually happens. Those who have read ahead or have already read this or whatever, those who know, you know how heart-wrenching that is. I'm gonna cry. But yeah, that scene hits so much more when you don't, a lot of things that he's saying and a lot of things that are happening the second time read, this is hitting so much more now that I know everything, I always love authors who can write like that. I love For the Wolfie, because For the Wolfie is the one who wrote it, and Corndog / Patrol is the one who just draws the images, right? For the Wolfie, you are doing amazing with your writing. The whole perspective thing, you have that on set with, obviously the perspective of, Hizashi knows that some vampires are bitches, but not all vampires are, right? And obviously Shouta has the whole, all vampires are bitches. No vampires aren't bitches. Which, again, glass house, Shouta, glass house. But it's really good, and to be able to reread this, right? This is my second time reading this fanfic, and having new appreciation for it, having new material, because I'm like, oh, this makes more sense now, or this, oh my god, from this and this. Just, when an author does, you can see that when the second read, right? When that happens, that means the author really put thought into their fanfic and their writing. Fanfic, oh my god. Into their writing, right? Meaning that they actually laid the groundwork, laid the base work, and you're seeing it pay off. the second time, you know? And yeah, it's amazing, and I applaud you for the Wolfie, you know? I applaud you. And as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Link to my social and Discord server are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.